Have you ever felt like something was missing, as if life had started before you arrived, as if the world is spinning, but your heart is still searching for meaning? What if the answer to this void was not in the future, but in the beginning of everything? Before the first heartbeat, before the first tear, the first doubt, the first mistake. There was a time when everything was perfect, where there was no guilt, where man walked with God, without fear, without shame, without distance. Have we forgotten who we really are? Because we've forgotten where we came from. The book of Genesis is not just an ancient account. It's a mirror, a calling, a reminder that we were created with purpose, with intention, with dignity. We are not dust lost to chance. We are an image. We are divine breath. In this video, prepare to return to the place where it all began, where love was not a quest, but a constant presence. And if you watch until the end, you might find that there is still a way back. Eden may have been closed, but the call to the origin continues to echo. Before the sound, before the light, before any life form could breathe, there was only silence. Not ordinary silence, but absolute silence, without time, without matter, without space. A void so complete that even the concept of emptiness did not yet exist. And then, a voice. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't a bang, it was something simpler and deeper. One word, an order. And she is the one who started it all. What is behind the origin of the universe? Would it be a chance without purpose or the result of a precise intention? The answer, for millions around the world, goes through centuries of tradition and is found in the words that open the oldest and most read book in history. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. This statement is more than a declaration of power. It suggests a deliberate gesture, an act of will, a creation with meaning. In the origin narrative, the world does not emerge from a battle between gods or disorderly chaos, as in so many ancient myths. It arises from speech. Language shapes existence. Each command establishes a boundary, light and darkness, sky and sea, dry land and vegetation. With each new stage, something different takes shape, and the result is evaluated with a direct verdict. This is good. But the most intriguing was yet to come, because among the stars and oceans, among the creatures of the air and the fields, there was a unique creation, not shaped like other beings, but formed with special intention. God comes down, not to utter a word, but to act directly. He touches the earth, takes the dust, and forms a figure. That wasn't life yet. It was just a form. The difference happened when the breath invaded the mold, a breath that was not wind, but breath, conscious life. Then the first human being is born. He does not appear as a servant, nor as a piece in a divine game, appears as an image, as a reflection. The term used in the ancient Hebrew language is tselem, which implies representation, functional similarity, and dignity. This completely changes the scenario. Human beings are created not to lose themselves in creation, but to lead it, cultivate it, and protect it. At the center of this new world was a garden, a space where everything coexisted in balance. There was no pain, no scarcity, no competition. It was a place of abundance, but also of responsibility. The first couple receives the mission of caring for the land, naming the animals, cultivating the fields, and living in harmony with the Creator. There were no temples, because the garden itself was the place of encounter with the sacred. However, there was one condition. Among all the trees, there were two with special significance. One gave access to lasting life. The other brought knowledge, not in the sense of information, but of experience of good and evil. The choice existed, and with it, freedom. This freedom was not just symbolic, it was real. The man and woman were not programmed to obey. They had the capacity to make decisions, even if that decision could bring rupture. The presence of the possibility of making mistakes is what gives meaning to true obedience. And so, in that scenario of perfection, the seed of risk was also planted. Creation is not just an account of the beginning of the world, it is the introduction to human identity. We are not defined primarily by our flaws, but by our origins. We were shaped with purpose. We were thought. And this idea, as old as humanity's first written words, continues to resonate with current questions. Where did we come from? Why do we exist? What is the value of life? Answering these questions requires not just looking at the universe, but also within consciousness itself. The ancient text that describes creation does not present scientific formulas, but offers a spiritual map, an understanding of reality that goes beyond the visible. The garden was not just a place, but a state. It represented what it is to live in full communion with the Creator, with others, with the earth. It was there, amidst the initial harmony, that the human journey began, not as a tragedy, but as a possibility. The possibility of choosing, of trusting, of responding to the call to care, name, and live together. This beginning reveals more than the origin of matter. It reveals the principle of responsibility, the beginning of meaning, and the inauguration of freedom. Because if there was a beginning, then there is direction. If we were made with intention, then we are not the work of chance. And if we were shaped with value, then living is more than existing. It is responding to the call of who we are. Life in the garden continued lightly. Every sound of nature was familiar. Every step of the first humans was firm, fearless. They didn't know guilt. They didn't know what it was like to hide. Everything was before them: the clear sky, the serene river, the animals in harmony, the voice of God nearby. They could touch, smell, and taste. The world was a gift, but not a toy. There was a limit, a sign that freedom is not the absence of rules, but the conscious choice to respect them. Among the trees of abundance, there was a distinct one, located in the center of the garden. Its fruit was like any other, but its function was different. It didn't just bring flavor or nutrition, but consequence. It was not the bad tree, but the symbol of a choice. God had said clearly, if they eat from it, they will die. Not because the fruit was poisonous, but because disobedience would break the created order. That was the border between trust and suspicion, between communion and separation. In this environment, the figure of the serpent appears. It was no ordinary animal. In the ancient text, she appears as cunning, capable of dialogue, insinuating ideas. His role was not to attack with force, but to plant doubt with words. His method was subtle. Did God really say you can't eat from any tree? The strategy was clear: distort what was said, create confusion, and undermine trust. The woman responds with what she heard, but with a small change. We can't even touch it. Fear had already contaminated clarity. The conversation progresses, and the serpent offers more than a fruit. It offers the promise of autonomy. It says that when you eat, your eyes will open, and you will be like God. This was more than sensory temptation. It was the proposal of independence. The human being, created to reflect, now wanted to replace. The woman looks, sees beauty, and imagines gain. Take it, eat, and he gives it to the man, who also eats it. There is no immediate drama. There is no thunder or earthquakes. What changes first is internal. The eyes open, but not to glory, to shame. Nudity, once natural, now causes discomfort. They hide, not out of fear of the forest, but of their own vulnerability. The relationship with God, which was open and peaceful, is now avoided. When he walks through the garden, they run away. And when called, they respond with fear. We are naked. God's answer does not come with shouts, but with questions. Who told them they were naked? Did they eat from the tree? These are not questions out of ignorance, but out of justice. Every word weighs. Blame is shifted. The man blames the woman blames the snake. No one fully accepts it. The breach of trust is not just in the act, but in the reaction to the error. The consequences are stated. pain enters the cycle of life. Work, once enjoyable, becomes heavy. The land, which previously produced easily, would now respond with resistance. The relationship between man and woman, between humans and the earth, between God and creation, everything has been affected. The garden was no longer a home. They are taken away, not as cruel punishment, but so that they will not perpetuate their broken condition by eating from the tree of life. But even in the midst of the fall, there is promise. When speaking to the serpent, God declares that a descendant of the woman would one day crush his head. It is the first glimpse of restoration. Christian theology recognizes this statement, recorded in Genesis, as the foreshadowing of future redemption, millennia before the story of Jesus. The couple has children. The world continues, but it is no longer the same. Cain and Abel, the first two sons, carry the contrast of the new humanity. One cultivates the land, another takes care of herds. Both offer something to the Creator. Abel chooses the best of his flock. Cain delivers fruits from the ground. God is pleased with Abel's attitude, not just the offering. Envy is born silently, but grows quickly. God notices and warns Cain, "If you do good, you will be accepted. But sin is at the door, and it wants to dominate you. It is up to you to overcome it." This warning reveals that evil, even after the fall, can still be resisted. But Cain chooses to ignore it. He takes his brother to the field and, in a silent and definitive act, spills human blood for the first time. When confronted, he nonchalantly responds, "Am I my brother's keeper?" Abel's voice could no longer speak, but his blood cried out from the earth. The Creator listens. The soil, which was supposed to nourish, now becomes a witness. Cain is not destroyed, but marked. Not as eternal punishment, but as a sign of protection. He becomes a wanderer, without roots, carrying the marks of removal. The narrative does not end with condemnation, but with consequences. Each act has a weight. Freedom continues to exist, but with it, responsibility. Humanity advances. Generations follow one another, but the heart remains divided. The line between good and evil, once clear, now passes within each human being. The world that began with order and harmony now knows conflict, injustice, and pain. And yet, something remains. The promise. The hope that not every shadow is definitive, that between the dust and the pain, there is still a way. The days became long and dark. What had begun as a journey of communion between the Creator and His creation now became an internal and external struggle. As generations passed, reports showed that the presence of evil was no longer limited to isolated acts. It spread, becoming part of culture, language, and collective choices. The earth, once called to flourish under human care, began to groan under the weight of violence. This moral decadence did not come abruptly. It was built, generation after generation, with small concessions. The absence of reverence, the disregard for life, and the constant search for power and pleasure transformed society. Ancient texts describe this period as a time when every imagination of the thoughts of the human heart was continually evil, a direct, straightforward diagnosis. In this scenario, a new turning point emerges. The Creator observes the state of humanity and decides to intervene. But this intervention is not done impulsively. There is grief. The text itself suggests that God was grieved in his heart. This image does not show a distant being, but someone emotionally involved with its creation, hurt by its deformation. Then comes the decision to restart, to interrupt a cycle before it is completely destroyed. This restart takes place through a judgment, the flood, not as revenge, but as a response to widespread corruption. However, even in the midst of judgment, mercy remains. Among the entire population, one man stands out. His name is Noah. He is not presented as perfect, but as righteous in his time, someone who chose to live with integrity in an environment dominated by perversity. God calls you, guides you, and involves you in a plan of preservation. The construction of an ark is ordered, not an ordinary vessel, but a calculated refuge of exact dimensions, with compartments, levels, and careful sealing. Noah dedicates years of his life to this task. While everyone around lives as if nothing is wrong, he works. His work is not secret. It is public, visible, and provocative. But your loyalty does not depend on the acceptance of others. He believes, even without having seen rain. The day arrives. The ark is ready, the animals arrive, and the family enters. And then, the doors close. The rain, initially light, turns into a storm. Underground springs burst, rivers overflow, and the sky collapses. What was predictable falls apart. Chaos takes over. The water covers everything. But the ark floats. It does not impede judgment, but protects in the midst of it. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain does not stop. The wait is long, and even after the end of the waters, the time inside the ark extends. Noah does not rush. He observes, tests, and discerns. When he finally leaves, he does so not in a hurry, but with reverence. The first act after touching the ground is to erect an altar, a gesture of recognition. Life had been preserved not by human merit, but by divine grace. In response, the Creator establishes a pact, a unilaterally signed commitment. The earth would never again be destroyed by water. As a sign, the bow appears in the clouds. The rainbow, in addition to natural beauty, becomes a reminder that justice and mercy can walk together. Even in the face of human failure, there is room for new beginnings. Over time, Noah's descendants multiply. Peoples spread, regions form, and languages begin to emerge. But despite the new chance, the human heart remains susceptible to pride. At a certain point, a generation emerges determined to build more than cities. She wants to consolidate a symbol of autonomy, a tower that reaches the sky. The intention is not to celebrate creation, but to exalt itself. Let's make a name for ourselves, they say. There is no reference to the Creator. The project is human-centered. This episode, known as the Tower of Babel, is not just about engineering or architecture. It's about motivation. The construction represents the human attempt to reach the heavens without depending on God, to establish unity without humility. The problem is not in the tower itself, but in the arrogance that supports it. The divine response is not destruction, but dispersal. The language, until then common, is multiplied. Workers stop understanding each other. Confusion breaks the rhythm. The project is abandoned. People spread out, forming different peoples, cultures, and nations. The city is named Babel because of the mixture of languages. This intervention does not eliminate human beings, but limits their destructive advance. Once again, judgment is balanced with preservation. These two episodes, the Flood and Babel, reveal something essential about the relationship between God and humanity. Justice is neither blind nor merciless, and mercy does not ignore mistakes. Both work together. When limits are crossed, there are consequences. But even in corrective actions, there are signs of caution. The ark, the arch, and the multiplication of languages, all are signs that, even in the midst of chaos, the Creator continues to guide history. After the dispersion in Babel, people multiplied and occupied new regions. Cities were built, borders were drawn, but the distance between the Creator and his creatures continued to grow. Even though traces of the divine presence remained in the collective memory, many began to follow gods made by human hands. The original bond had been obfuscated. It was in this context that history took a new direction, no longer centered on a broad humanity, but on a specific man, with whom God decided to start something completely new. His name was Abram. Living in the city of Ur, one of the most developed urban centers in ancient Mesopotamia, Abram belonged to an idolatrous family, surrounded by local religious practices. And yet, it was there that an unexpected voice called him. There were no detailed explanations, no full assurances. The order was direct: leave your land, your relatives, your home, and leave for an unknown destination. The promise that accompanied the call was equally grand: to form a great nation, to bless all the peoples of the earth through their lineage. Accepting this proposal required more than courage. It required trust in a direction he couldn't see. Abram obeyed. He abandoned his roots, left behind an established culture, and began to live in tents, following divine guidance, stage by stage. He did not build empires. He did not seek personal glory, but his life marked the beginning of a history that would span centuries. Over time, its name was changed. From Abram, which means exalted father, he came to be called Abraham, father of many nations. The name change was not just symbolic, it represented a new purpose. The promise, however, faced a visible obstacle. Sarah, his wife, was barren. It had been decades since left, and there were no children. Age advanced. Hope wavered. Humane attempts were made. Sarah, believing that the promise would not be fulfilled through her, offered her servant Hagar to bear a son. Ishmael was born, but God made it clear that the son of promise would come from Sarah. When the announcement was finally made directly that she would have a son in her old age, they both reacted with astonishment. And yet, the child came. Isaac was born when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, a milestone that defied all natural odds. The joy, however, would soon give way to the most difficult test. Years later, God asks Abraham to take Isaac to a mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. The narrative describes this moment soberly. Abraham does not argue. He walks for days, carries firewood, and prepares the altar. Isaac, already conscious, questions where the sacrificial lamb would be. His father's response reveals more than faith. It reveals surrender. God will provide. When everything is ready and the extreme act seems inevitable, the divine voice interrupts it. A lamb appears trapped by its horns. Abraham then understands it was not a cruel demand, but proof of full trust. The promise remains. Faith is confirmed. And from that moment on, the alliance is reaffirmed with greater intensity. Abraham would be the ancestor of a multitude, and through his descendants, all the families of the earth would be touched. Isaac grows up and inherits not only his father's possessions, but also his commitment to divine purpose. He marries Rebekah, and the couple faces the same dilemma: sterility. After persistent prayers, Rebekah becomes pregnant with twins. But from the womb, you can see that there is tension between them. She seeks understanding and hears that two nations would be formed from those children and that the oldest would serve the youngest, an inversion of the common logic of the time. Esau and Jacob are born. The first is a hunter, strong and impulsive. The second is observant and strategic. The rivalry between the two intensifies as time passes. In a moment of weakness, Esau exchanges his birthright for a plate of food. Later, under the influence of his mother, Jacob deceives his elderly father and receives the blessing intended for his brother. This episode marks a turning point in Jacob's trajectory. Now he carries the blessing, but also the weight of escape. Rejected by Esau, he leaves for the land of his relatives. On the way, he camps alone, and during the night, he has a vivid dream, a staircase that connected the earth to the heavens, with angels going up and down. At the top, God reaffirms the covenant made with Abraham and Isaac. The land on which he slept would be given to him and his descendants. This dream was not just a vision. It was the moment when Jacob, still marked by cunning and flight, began to understand that the bond with God was not automatically inherited. It was personal. He wakes up with fear, recognizing that that place was sacred, even without him knowing. It establishes a milestone, a commitment, a new stage. This journey, which had begun with a promise to a lonely man, now spanned generations. Each character had their marks, their mistakes, their dilemmas. But the alliance remained alive. not because of the perfection of those who received it, but because of the fidelity of those who had made it. Jacob's path continued to be marked by difficult decisions and encounters that shaped his identity. His children became the beginning of the tribes of a future nation, but within his own home, family tensions would still be the scene of pain and transformation. Among all the children, there was one that stood out. Joseph, Rachel's firstborn, was viewed with special affection by his father. His presence evoked memories of deep love, but it also aroused jealousy in the brothers. Jacob's favoritism did not go unnoticed. He had presented Joseph with a tunic made from different fabrics, something unusual and symbolic. That piece, rich in colors, made the distinction evident. More than clothing, it was a sign that Jose occupied a prominent place. The brothers, faced with this, harbored silent resentment. In addition to the paternal attention, Jose began to report dreams that aroused discomfort. In his night visions, the brothers bowed before him, as did the sun, moon, and stars. For him, those reports were loaded with meaning. To others, they sounded like arrogance. Words that could have been heard with curiosity were met with indignation. This seemed unbearable. One day, Joseph was sent by his father to check on his brothers who were shepherding away from home. When they saw him from afar, the decision was immediate. Get rid of him. Initially, they thought about killing him, but the idea of shedding blood was replaced by another, throwing it into a cistern and leaving it there. Later, upon noticing the approach of traveling merchants, they decided to sell it. 20 silver coins was the price, no turning back. Joseph was taken to Egypt, and the brothers covered up the act with a lie. They used the blood-stained tunic to deceive Jacob, who fell into deep mourning, convinced of the death of his beloved son. Once in Egyptian lands, Joseph was acquired by Potiphar, a high-ranking official. Even as a servant, he demonstrated excellence. His honest stance drew attention. Everything he touched prospered. He gained responsibilities, and in a short time, he was coordinating the affairs of his master's house. But stability would be interrupted by a new challenge. Potiphar's wife began to look at Joseph with desire. He tried to persuade him on several occasions. He resisted, not just out of loyalty to the boss, but out of awareness that that would be a serious deviation before God. On one of the dates, she grabbed him by his clothes. Joseph fled, leaving his cloak behind. The false accusation came next. With no evidence in his favor, he was thrown into prison. The arrest, however, did not end his trajectory. Even there, his character remained firm. He gained respect among the inmates and was entrusted with internal responsibilities. During this period, 2 of the Pharaoh's employees were arrested, the butler and the baker. Each had a disturbing dream. Jose listened to them attentively and revealed the meaning of the visions. For the butler, good news, he would be restored to his post. For the baker, a tragic fate. Everything went exactly as planned. Joseph asked that, when he left, the butler mention him to Pharaoh, but he forgot. 2 years passed until a new episode changed the course of events. The Pharaoh had 2 enigmatic dreams. Neither sages nor counselors could interpret them. It was then that the butler remembered Joseph. Immediately, they sent for him. After introducing himself, Jose made it clear that the answer would come from God, not him. The content of the dreams pointed to 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of severe scarcity. The interpretation was accompanied by strategic advice: store during abundance to survive the crisis. Pharaoh was impressed. He recognized rare discernment in Joseph. He appointed him administrator of the entire territory. Only the throne placed him above. Jose took control of national logistics. He stored grain, built barns, and planned routes. When the famine arrived, Egypt was prepared. The famine didn't just affect Egypt. In neighboring regions, the crisis also took hold. It was in this scenario that Joseph's brothers, without recognizing him, came to look for food. Upon seeing them, Joseph recognized them immediately. But it didn't reveal itself. He preferred to observe. Tested your intentions. I wanted to know if they had changed. He created situations to evaluate his character. He asked them to bring his younger brother, Benjamin. He planted objects in his belongings, waited for reactions. When Judah, one of the brothers, offered himself as a substitute so as not to see his father's suffering, Joseph understood that something had changed. The harshness of before had given way to responsibility. He no longer held back his tears. He revealed his identity. The shock was immense. Fear settled between the brothers. But Joseph did not seek revenge. He said firmly, "It wasn't you who sent me here. It was God. He put me in this position to preserve lives." His words didn't just comfort them. They sealed the reconciliation. Jose provided shelter for the entire family. He brought Jacob to Egypt. He saw his father again. He touched his face. The reunion was marked by deep emotion. He who had been sold into slavery was now a source of sustenance for everyone. And his trajectory, marked by injustice, proved to be an instrument of redemption. Jose's reunion with his family was not just a family restoration. It was a turning point that linked the beginning of a promise to its concrete expansion. Jacob's clan, now gathered in foreign territory, began to live as a growing people. Egypt, which had been a scene of trial, was transformed into a refuge. However, the consequences of that change were not yet visible. The story of the promise did not end there. It only expanded. Jacob lived his last years in peace. Before leaving, he gathered his children, talked about the future, and blessed each one. With his words, he outlined what was to come, describing destinies, forces, and conflicts that would still be revealed in future generations. The covenant that had begun with Abraham was now firmly planted in the hearts of 12 lineages. What was born with a person crossed borders and became a people. After Jacob's death, an uncomfortable silence hung over the brothers. They feared that Jose, now free from paternal obligation, would go back and charge for the past. He, however, responded calmly. "The evil they planned against me was reversed for good, to preserve lives as we see them today." This was not just an expression of forgiveness, but an insight into how God acts even in the midst of human error. Years passed. Joseph lived long enough to see descendants and keep hope alive. When he felt that his days were coming to an end, he made a specific request, that his bones be taken back to the promised land when the people left there. He knew that his stay in Egypt would not be eternal. The promise still called back to the origins. The book that began with a formless and empty universe ends with a multiplied people, with roots and memory, ready for the next chapters of history. Creation gave way to the fall, which in turn revealed judgment. Judgment was balanced with grace, and grace was manifested in alliances, families, journeys, and reconciliations. The God who shaped man from the dust also sustained his descendants among deserts, prisons, and palaces. Each figure presented, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, and Joseph, reveals fragments of a narrative that never failed to point to a greater purpose. Not the fall completely compromised the plan, not even the suffering was a sign of absence. Through it all, there was direction. And it is in this direction that the story continues. The people will become a nation. The promise will come from memory to the movement. And the God who walked in the garden will now lead us along more arduous paths, but always with the same intention, to restore. Genesis ends, but the journey has only begun. What we learn from these lives is not just the retelling of ancient facts. It is a call to recognize that even in the darkest phases, there are seeds of purpose being planted. And perhaps the most transformative point is precisely there. Understanding that beginnings, however fragile they may seem, carry within them the possibilities of something eternal. If you enjoyed the content and want to support our work so we can continue to bring you more research and in-depth analysis, please consider making a donation of any amount. This contribution directly helps the channel grow and produce even richer materials. Thank you very much for your support.